Ann Thompson, IndieWire editor-at-large, and your host for today's half hour with HBO and HBO Max's documentary features. We have an extraordinary group of filmmakers here today, and we're going to start out with David France. You may remember him from How to Survive a Plague. Now he has a new film, Welcome to Chechnya, which blew everybody's mind back at Sundance and is still in the conversation. So let's look at a clip.
Очень грустно сегодня. Все живут тут 2 недели, 15 дней максимум. И как семья уже все стали, даже со сложными своими характерами. Как свои уже. Сейчас очень сложно будет уезжать. Привык очень ко всем. Некоторые общаются, думают, что можно созвониться, услышать голос родных. Ну, вообще поговорить там на своем родном языке. А я-то не могу уже. Я не позвоню больше никому. Да и поговорить больше на своем родном языке мне не удастся. И голоса своих родных я больше никогда в жизни не услышу.
And we have Amy Ziering and Kirby Dick. You know them from The Hunting Ground, The Invisible War, Emmy nominated, Oscar nominated, all that stuff. And we now have this extraordinary new movie on the record. And let's look at a clip.
And then the other thing that did it, I read Harold Perrineau's statement about his daughter, Aurora. And he said he was terrified when she decided to come forward. But he said he looked at her the other day and realized my daughter's not a victim anymore. She's a warrior. And I thought, I'd like to be a warrior. I'm tired of being a victim. I've been a victim for 22 years. Let me see what the other thing feels like. Can't be worse. And that's when I said, okay, I will go on the record.
And Tommy Oliver, writer, director, producer, entrepreneur, founder and chief executive officer of Confluential Content. And he's made a lot of movies too. Kinyarwanda is one that Roger Ebert adored. And he now has this 40 Years a Prisoner, which is a story I never heard of, and it blew my mind too. So see a clip.
I've been going to prison for 38 years because my mother and father are both in prison.
4 minutes of gunfire, 1 policeman killed, and members of the group Move had been routed from their house.
So this would have been her cell?
Yeah.
The Move organization experienced so much hate and anger from the system. What can I do about that except just keep on pushing?
Every time I fight, the reason I fight is to not fight again. Every time I fight, the reason I fight is to not fight again.
Okay, so I'm going to start with David and ask him, and I'm going to ask each of you this question. Just tell me how you found this story. These are, you guys are very demanding about what you take your time to delve into. And I wondered, David, how you found this one.
Well, you're right. When we lift up these stories, it takes years really to carry them out and to see them through. And this is a story that first broke in early 2017. I think, we all paid a little bit of attention to it. In April of that year, an investigative reporter in Russia revealed this atrocity in Chechnya, where the president of Chechnya is actually, waging a genocide against the LGBTQ community there. And then it just drifted away from headlines. And, I've often blamed the news industry for kind of taking our focus away from what was happening there. But my focus went away from it too, until midsummer when I read an article in the New Yorker by the journalist Masha Gessen, who told the story of what ordinary Russians were doing to respond to this genocide. This kind of heroic effort by activists to rescue people, literally rescue people and try to bring them to safety. And when I read that story, I knew that I wanted to help bring attention to the work that they were doing to try to make it easier for them and to bring the world attention back to this crime.
Amy and Kirby, how did this story come to you? And tell us a little bit about how long it took to make it real.
The film is sort of focuses on how difficult it is for Black women to come forward and talk about assault because of racist culture and the ways in which they face multiple oppressions that afflict them not only as survivors of assault, but as women of color. And so there's that impediment for them to actually speak and voice their complaints, because in a way it's jeopardizing the health and safety of Black men, because this is a racist culture that, Black men have targets on their backs for walking down the street. So that was a huge, so it was a long path, generating trust, getting Oprah Winfrey on as an executive producer to sort of co-author it with us. And she was an amazing collaborator. And then to get a distributor with the courage to come forward and support this film and give it a platform. So that journey was extremely, and still is, a bit of a hurdle.
So Kirby, it was about building trust with Drew, and getting. And you guys were willing to go down the road with her for a really long time before she was even committed, right?
That is true. We got in touch with her actually before she'd even decided to go public, to go on the record. She was, it was about a couple of months, I think, before she actually told her story in the New York Times. And we were very interested in following her right away, because the public knows about survivors after they come forward, but they don't know the difficulties and the challenges and just the emotional struggle they go through in the process to get to that point to say, yes, I will tell my story. And we just thought it was a kind of a unique documentary moment to be able to cover that coming to that decision. And then, but even though, we were filming that and we filmed her going on the record with the New York Times, she was also not certain whether she wanted to go on the record with us, right? And it was at that point that Amy and I said to her, look, we totally understand that. We believe in you, but we don't want to put you in a position that you don't want to be in. So we're going to continue filming you. And we filmed her, I think, for more than a year without getting a release, until finally, enough trust had been built up. I mean, there was always it was wonderful to work with her, but she had these issues that she had to work through. And so finally, after about a year, she signed the release, and we continued filming after that.
So Tommy, you've got a lot on your plate. You're a busy man, producing and directing and entrepreneuring. How did you come to again, these films take a long time. How did you find this story, and why was it so compelling to you?
So growing up in Philly, you hear about Move, but you don't really hear about Move. And so I didn't know what they were or what happened. And it was just sort of this thing that was talked about in broken whispers almost. And I just started doing my own research at some point, maybe 4 years ago or so. And I read everything that I could. I just went down the research rabbit hole. I watched everything I could. I just dug in. And I realized there was still so much that wasn't there. And so I had a friend make an introduction to Move. And when I went there, I'd actually gone to meet Ramona Africa, and she brought along Mike Africa Jr. with her. And meeting Mike changed everything. Mike, I didn't realize that his parents were still in prison, along with the other remaining members of the Move 9, because 2 of them had died in prison. I had no idea that he had literally been born in prison. And then to meet this guy who, despite everything that he went through, he did not have a shred of bitterness about him. He was just a guy, a kid who wanted his family home. He wanted his parents home. And it probably took me about 4 years, honestly, to realize that it was so much of why I connected with it, because I didn't grow up with a regular family. I never met my dad. My mom wasn't around when I was young. And it was just an immediate emotional bond to this person who just wanted his family home. And so that sort of set me on this path, sort of these dual paths of following his story, which he was very gracious with, because Move had been burned and misrepresented so many times previously. But for whatever reason, he trusted me. And so I followed his journey while also digging into what happened, because if I was going to follow his story, I needed to understand why his parents were in prison in the first place. Yet there was no definitive account of what happened. And so I went down along with the really incredible partners trying to figure out what happened. And so that's sort of how it started for us.
Excellent, excellent. Back to you, David. The thing that struck me about what you had to go through was you had some people stories to tell that were they were in big danger. They were. This was not. This wasn't. You couldn't fool around. If you were going to get your story, you had to somehow protect your sources. So tell us how you went about doing that. I love the VFX of it all too. It's a fascinating aspect of what you had to do.
Well, yeah, just talking my way into the safe houses required examining a dozen different security protocols and strategies, how we were going to move cameras in and out, how we were going to actually enter and leave, and then how to talk to the people who are fleeing this persecution, whose lives are so imperiled, how to talk to them about what they wanted, and whether or not this was even going to be possible. I wanted to, what I knew from being there, and was to what it looked like to see them, to see what they were going through, to see them on their journey, and seeing them was the last thing in the world they wanted because of this campaign, and because they were really literally marked for death. They were being hunted, and so I promised people that I would disguise them thoroughly. We talked about the highest standard of disguise, which was that even their mothers wouldn't recognize them. So we had kind of a handshake with the subjects that we were going to reach for that. But I also agreed that I would circle back to them and show them how we were going to do this, because I really literally had no idea how to do this. And
because partly you have an aesthetic task, which is to not throw the people watching the movie out of the movie.
Right, exactly, right. So, and the tools, what I discovered when I got back to the edit suite, the tools that are available to documentary filmmakers are very limiting. From the blurs and the pixelations to the black bars to the rotomation approach, which I thought was going to give us something useful, but it didn't. We tried everything. We tried like Snapchat technology with, glasses, or we were trying masks, and we had this whole kind of iconography of masks, from like the bank robber to the stagecoach robber to the Ninja Turtles, and and none of those did us any favor. And for the most part, they didn't even really disguise the people from their mothers. And it wasn't until we started dipping our toes into the area of AI and deep machine learning, really like the world of deep fake, although turning it on its head, that we realized that we had something we could bring back to the people who we promised anonymity to, and say, what we actually did is we produced like stills for each individual, and I would take the still to them and say, who's this? And even they would struggle to find themselves in those images.
It's remarkable, because you actually you created new faces for them, and digitally put them on, but you can still see the real person's musculature and movements, and it's real. It doesn't feel fake.
It's not a created face, it's a real face. It just belongs to somebody else. We recruited from activist circles, queer activist circles in New York and LA and San Francisco, people who were willing to use their face as a human shield to protect the identities of the people who are in the film. So those are activists doing activism in the film by just letting us absorb their face in this algorithm that we created, and then digitally map it over the faces of the people who we shot. And you're right that it tracks every one of the underlying expressions, the micro expressions, the sadnesses, the you see hope, you see fear, you see all of that under someone else's skin. So it's, as a technique, it really opened up the possibility of telling these people's stories, because under the kind of threat that they're living, they had the power of their own voice taken away from them. And this was my promise to them, that I would give them back that power somehow in a safe way. I also replaced a number of the voices for the subjects who are in the film, also using other people's voices, but in a more traditional kind of looping environment, an ADR environment.
I had
I
no
loved
idea.
it. I was just saying, I loved it when you, when your main subject decided to say his name publicly, that his face changed. I mean, it was such an, it was powerful. It was very existential. It caused you to think through, you know, all kinds of issues of watching a film and going public all in one moment. It was very nice.
And you feel his vulnerability there, don't you?
Yeah.
And there he is without that shield. And,
yeah.
So, Amy and Kirby, one of the things that your movie tracks is the journey of Drew from someone who's very frightened and anxious about going forward to someone who's, as you say in this clip that we just looked at, a warrior. And I was very moved by that journey that she took. Tell me how the Me Too movement helped her to come to her courage.
I mean, the whole process we documented in the film about how she just didn't think the Me Too movement applied to her.
Right.
You want to talk about that?
Yeah,
I mean,
that's good. Yeah, that's a yeah. So yeah, as Drew says in the film, I mean, you know, when Me Too happened, she was like, "This is important. This is amazing. This is unprecedented." But all right, it's really not for me. I mean, she felt it was a very white-centric movement. You know, most of the women that were getting prominence in play were, you know, white actresses who were getting the media attention and the media coverage. And she thought, well, you know, and it was that but it started her wheels turning. And actually, Anne, it started her having flashbacks. You know, she actually had sort of really repressed this. And, you know, the trauma was, she knew this was like the third rail, something she could never talk about, and was just her past. And so the Me Too was like, wait. And so these stories started haunting her. And then, as she says in the films, you know, some women came forward to talk about her predator in public. And she felt like, oh my God, do I have to, you know, do I now have a responsibility to support these women? It was really that. And you sort of watch her in the film struggle in real time to figure out what her responsibility is. And does she have the strength, you know, to put herself and her family through what going public means?
And what's interesting, you know, is that, you know, for survivors, other people coming forward is both hopeful, encouraging, finally someone speaking out, but it also, as Amy said, it causes them to, it's a traumatic experience for them too, at the same time. So they're continually negotiating both these things at the same moment. And it's, you know, again, it's just why it's so important for us to support survivors when they come forward, because without these people going through this process, having this courage, coming forward, you know, this problem will continue.
Tommy, tell me a little bit about meeting the parents finally of your subject. I was very moved by them. These people who had been in jail for 40 years, who weren't able to raise their children, and then they suddenly, you know, are back in the world, and they're so loving.
So you are exactly right. And I actually got to meet them quite a while before they came home. And so Mike and I took a number of trips to go see them, including his mom, who was in Cambridge Springs, which is almost 7.5 hours from Philly. And so Mike and I took that journey to go see them, I don't know, maybe 6 times. And then the go see its dad probably maybe 3 or 4 times. And so exactly what you picked up on was what I realized the first time I saw them, where they were just lovely, happy, positive people, despite their circumstances, despite their surroundings. And you say that they didn't raise them, but it's it's a weird thing because Mike's dad was very much there for him from afar. And he made certain that he was able to talk to him, to counsel him, to, like, Michael will tell you, is like, look, if I needed a pair of sneakers, my dad sent me a pair of sneakers, even though he was making 23 cents an hour. Like, he figured out how to be there and how to show his love and support as in whatever form he could. And so the reunion, it was not as special for me as it was for them, but it was pretty darn special because I'd gotten to know them. I'd gotten to understand all of what was happening. And these are two people who had not seen each other in 40 years, who could not speak to each other. There are no phone calls. There's no anything. They hadn't heard each other's voices. They hadn't touched each other. And they were still madly in love.
You can see it on there's a shot of them sitting next to each other on the sofa, and you know, you read body language. What am I? They were still hot for each other.
They are still hot for each other, and it is adorable. I mean, they spent 4 decades apart, and so it was just a lovely thing. And one of the things, though, that Mike Sr. talked about was, as much as he wanted to be home and as much as he wanted to see his wife, what he really wanted was for the burden of his son trying to get them home off of him. And it's actually where the title comes from. 40 Years a Prisoner isn't about the parents. It's not referring to them. It refers to Mike Jr.
In the other thing that all three of these films take full advantage of is using archive footage, and David, you especially also in a horrifying way use iPhone footage. Can you talk about how you used archive and how it enhanced your movie, and some of the surprises in the time we have left? Some key discovery that enhanced your movie.
There's really not much archive, but it's surgical, I think. And when we started on this film project, Russia was denying in international fora that any of this was even going on. They were saying there are no witnesses, there's no evidence, this is all a lie concocted by the West to besmirch Russia in the international plane. But it turned out that there was plenty of evidence, and that it was gathered by the people who were committing these crimes themselves. It was, forensic evidence that was really being shared amongst people as kind of trophies, official purge, and so we started looking for it. We knew it was there. We knew it was there because the people who had been tortured and had escaped all said, every one of them said, that their torture was filmed. That there was always somebody there taking a record of it. And ultimately, we decided to use judiciously, I think, three different clips that show what's happening, and just little bits of them to give a flavor, to give you as the audience the feeling that everybody in all of those scenes and all of those shelters where we did our filming, what they all knew, and that the images that haunted them were things that can't simply be explained. They have to be experienced in a way, and that's why we repurposed that those trophy videos into actual evidence that can be used to prove that this is happening. You can see the identities of the people in those videos. We know who's committing those crimes. We know who those people are. And now the authorities know who those people are too.
Yeah, I mean, that's a tribute to our editor, Sarah Newens, who was, obviously was very knowledgeable about it, but just really immersed herself in that. I think the other thing that was, it's very powerful in the film is the Anita Hill appearing at the, nomination hearing of the Supreme Court Justice. And it's just to see that from Drew Dixon's point of view, from someone who's gone through that same experience or similar experience as Anita Hill, and to realize how that hearing shut down so many survivors, especially survivors who are women of color. And I mean, obviously we all lived through that, and it was horrific, and we knew that the truth was being suppressed. But when it's someone who looks like you and has a similar experience of you up there, it sent a message to everyone, every woman of color, that, you know, the most powerful men in our country will shut you down and not allow you to speak. And I think that moment, I know, is really affecting to audiences.
Absolutely.
Yeah. It's almost like, you know, time has stood still. Like, you realize how important these acts of courage. I was thinking about what you said, Anne, what connects our films, and all three of our films really deal with how, you know, fabricated oppressions, right? Fabricated to consolidate power. We create, you know, racism so that there's an other that we can demonize and then, you know, grab more power for ourselves. Or LGBTQ, you know, we demonize a whole population, as you see in Chechnya, so that he can sort of divert and have the population feel like they have a, you know, they have something to sort of hang their frustration, anger, and energy on, and rightfully express it by oppressing another people. And all of our films really are about these systemic oppressions, and then these individuals who rise forward despite and have the courage to speak, or to, you know, and to sort of what they do with their trauma and how traumatized a population we are, whether it's through, you know, racist incarceration or homophobia or, you know, sexual, not believing survivors. So I think that I really want to say that anyone watching this, if you haven't, please watch Tommy and David's films. We were talking a little bit beforehand, and Tommy was saying you honestly can't watch either of their films and come out the same. And it's important, you know, and so I'm just so grateful for them to have the courage, and it really also he gave me so much courage to really, you know, show these stories. You know, there were real true life and death people on the line by gathering this footage. So I just wanted to thank them.
Beautifully said, Amy. Thank you. Thank you very much. Well, just to go ahead, David. Sorry.
I think this other thing that holds these three films together is love, right? So it's love of self, love for family, love of community. There are stories about horrors, but it's the power of love really that brings them forward and attaches us to them. And I think that's why, to answer your first question again, Anne, that's why we chose these stories and why we gave up so much of our own lives to bring them out to audiences. It's because of the love that they represent.
Could not agree more.
That's beautiful. I always talk about my filmmaking is like a love letter to the people in it. You know, like, that's the passion. You know, I fall in love with them, and I can see that, Tommy. Oh my God, you know, in every frame of yours, and David as well. So yeah, that's beautiful, Stan.
But Tommy, you did use archive in a very effective way to almost prove, you know, the hideous racism of the world that put those people in jail in this incredibly unfair way. When you watch it, it's just horrifying.
It is, and I just wanted to tell the story accurately, and because it had not been told, and so many people either didn't know about it at all, or those who did, they had a completely warped view of it. And when we forget our history, or we bastardize our history, we are doomed to repeat it. And so there's, yeah. Yeah.
Well, so I'm going to wrap this up. Thank you to everyone listening to this panel, wherever you are, couch, office, poolside. Thank you, everybody, for helping us learn.